Good evening. Welcome to The National. I'm Andrew Chang. Adrian is away. We are going to start this hour with what's happening in Washington.
The cause of our democracy remains in danger. The conspiracy to thwart the will of the people is not over.
A public televised presentation of a congressional committee's findings after an almost year-long investigation into the events of January 6, 2020. The day a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol building, beating police officers, threatening lawmakers, all to keep Donald Trump in power. Katie Simpson joins us from Washington with the latest from these hearings. So, Katie, what have we learned so far tonight?
Andrew, these lawmakers are trying to make the American public have a dramatic aha moment, and it is riveting. They want to make voters realize that democracy was in danger on that day, January 6th, but it remains in danger, all because of a well-coordinated effort to overturn the results of the 2020 election. They are going to argue how the lie, the vote was rigged, was pushed aggressively by former President Donald Trump and his allies, and how they say Trump and those allies were repeatedly told and appeared to understand it was a lie. And for the very first time, the world is going to get details about what was happening inside the White House as rioters stormed the Capitol, as described this evening by Liz Cheney, the ranking Republican member of the committee.
You will hear testimony that, quote, the president did not really want to put anything out calling off the riot or asking his supporters to leave. You will hear that President Trump was yelling and, quote, really angry at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more. And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it.
Andrew, as I said, it is riveting. The committee hired a TV executive to produce these hearings. They want it to be powerful, and they hope the American public is paying attention and absorbing all of this.
And Katie, the committee is now playing video, some of which hasn't been seen before, certainly not before January 6th. They say they have evidence, receipts. Tell us more about how lawmakers are making their case.
You know what, Andrew, I'm sitting very close to my producers and I can hear them reacting to the video. We're not seeing it right now. We know that it is expected to be violent, but we've seen violent video from January 6th before. So, of course, the new video is what everyone is waiting to see here. A minute-by-minute breakdown, we understand, of what happened on that day. And again, it's all meant to hammer home the main argument as described by Benny Thompson, the Democratic chair of the committee.
January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup, a brazen attempt, as one rioter put it shortly after January 6th, to overthrow the government. The violence was no accident. It represented Trump's last stand, most desperate chance to halt the transfer of power.
They say January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup, the violence being no accident, and Donald Trump was at the center of it all. That is what Americans and the world really can expect to hear throughout these hearings that will air all summer.
Katie Simpson in Washington, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, now to this country, and a big warning to anyone with a mortgage. Your regular payment could rise by as much as 30% in the next 5 years. That's straight from the head of the Bank of Canada. And Tiff Macklem also hinted today that before this month is over, he might raise the key interest rate by another 0.5 percentage point. Now, in a moment, we'll show you the pressure that this puts on some homeowners and how they might plan to cope. But David Cochran begins with the politics of inflation as Macklem responds to a very public threat to fire him.
The Bank of Canada prides itself on being independent from politics, and Tiff Macklem is doing his best to keep it that way.
I'm going to leave politics to the politicians.
The politician in this case is Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leadership candidate who vows that as Prime Minister, he would fire Macklem for letting inflation rise.
I would fire the Governor of the Bank of Canada for surrendering his independence and agreeing to become Justin Trudeau's personal ATM machine.
We welcome criticism of our work and of our decisions. We're doing that ourselves.
He welcomes the criticism but rejects the argument the bank is entirely to blame, pointing instead to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and global supply chains that remain stubbornly tangled.
We have a job to do for Canadians.
But while it may not be his fault, inflation is his problem, and Macklem is warning of a painful solution.
We've been very clear with Canadians that they should expect a rising path for interest rates.
That rising path leads to higher mortgage rates in a stretched housing market where many Canadians borrowed big to buy big during the pandemic.
The economy can handle, indeed needs, higher interest rates. And given the unsustainable strength of housing activity, some moderation in housing would be healthy.
The bank's hope is a soft landing, cooling the economy while avoiding a recession. The Conservatives argue that landing could be made softer and come sooner.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals and the NDP continue to vote against Conservative measures that would provide relief. Why?
Mr. Speaker, we understand that affordability matters for Canadians.
But while Chrystia Freeland offered understanding, the finance minister is offering no new measures to help Canadians, instead pointing to existing programs that reduce the cost of childcare and increase benefits to low-income workers and families. David Cochrane, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, those rising rates promise to stretch a lot of monthly budgets. They could mean the difference between keeping a home or being forced to sell. And that's just one scenario. Philip Lishanuk shows us how the specter of higher payments is hitting different people.
Adi Nakdiwala has been looking for an investment property for almost 4 months. During the hot market, he was outbid numerous times. Now something else may push him to the sidelines.
Maybe this is not the right time.
With home prices up by about 50% on average during the pandemic, the Bank of Canada is warning that a reckoning is coming. Those low rates that helped some buyers barely squeeze into the market with relatively affordable payments are starting a long upward trend.
So it definitely worries me because, our salaries are not going up by 45%, right? So if the mortgage goes up by 40%, that's a huge hit to my budget.
While housing prices in the Greater Toronto Area have moderated, higher rates could erase affordability. This man and his wife bought a one-bedroom condo in downtown Toronto during the pandemic.
Now, our life is totally different. We have a child.
He's looking to trade up to a two-bedroom condo.
With interest rates going up, it's just almost impossible. And then the market is not going to correct enough to be able to offset the interest rate difference. So what that leads to is that we're not able to qualify for the home that we want.
Experts say there are a few strategies to cope with rising rates. Prepare your budget now or pay more later.
I would say that you should proactively be budgeting at this point in time.
Or consider a longer mortgage term that could help keep your payments manageable.
It's time to, really plan ahead and rest assured that you may see those increases and you should be prepared for them.
But when mortgage renewal time comes up in a few years, those who stretch their budgets just to buy, many may feel house poor and be part of a rush to sell. Philip Lishanuk, CBC News, Toronto.
And from cooking oil to cars, many things remain more expensive for Canadians if they can be found at all. Nisha Patel shows us the impact of lingering supply chain problems for retailers and their customers.
Jill Swartzentruber wanted to make sure her outdoor furniture store had enough stock to sell this summer.
There's a lot of construction going on and backyard renovation.
So amid global shortages and delays, she placed orders early.
We have had to take on another warehouse to make sure that we are set up for the season to be successful now.
The industry-wide delays have frustrated Canadian shoppers. While Kira Tone found what she was looking for here, she had less luck with a different retailer.
We tried to order a rug. They told us it was going to be $700 in shipping costs.
Soaring fuel prices are keeping those transportation costs high, even as shipping container prices are at their lowest levels in a year. And while there's less congestion at some ports like Shanghai, backlogs remain.
Anything that is coming in from overseas is really taking a much longer time to get here. Some say that if it's not on the water right now, then it's going to be a 2023 product.
Some supply chains are more tangled than others. The war in Ukraine has disrupted raw materials like sunflower oil. A semiconductor shortage continues to plague automakers.
And so if they miss the ability to get their hands on a very specific component, it can shut down the entire assembly line.
But some goods which were tough to find at the beginning of the pandemic are now more available, with some retailers overstocking.
They're going to want to offload that inventory. They're not going to want to hang on to those items for very long. And so you should see those items go on sale.
Schwartz and Truber hopes to make the most of the season.
We have 3 prime months that bring in majority of our annual income. So those months are very important to us. So each sale does matter.
Despite that extra buying, some products have already sold out. More lessons in a year where business has been anything but usual. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
In Shanghai, there are new COVID restrictions just a week after a strict 2-month lockdown was eased. Positive cases are causing several districts to undergo mass testing, but regular testing is becoming a new normal in China. Thousands of these tents have popped up across major cities. In many, a negative test is needed to enter offices or take transit. Canada is being called out for not doing more to ensure global access to COVID vaccines. And the criticism is coming from both inside and outside the country. Steve D'Souza explains.
While Canadians are hoping to put COVID in the past, for many in the world, access to vaccines, testing, and treatment is still missing.
Today, if you're a teacher in a country like Zimbabwe and you want to know your COVID-19 status, you have to pay up to half of your salary to access your testing results.
Next week at a World Trade Organization meeting, more than 100 countries will continue the push to lift intellectual property rules, allowing COVID vaccines to be produced by anyone. Canada hasn't taken a position, which global health advocates say means it's effectively blocking those efforts.
This concept of global solidarity that Canada gets so much mileage from is an empty and a hollow lie.
Today, in an open letter to Justin Trudeau, a group of prominent global health experts called on the Prime Minister to help make vaccines, tests, and treatments available globally as public goods.
The less the number of people fall sick, the less the virus replicates, less it mutates.
The pharmaceutical industry argues vaccine hesitancy and distribution are bigger problems than supply. The NDP foreign affairs critic says the Liberals care more about profits of big pharma than people desperate for help around the world. In a statement to CBC News, a spokesperson for the Minister of International Trade said Canada will always be a strong advocate for vaccine equity and supports a multilateral outcome on intellectual property specific to COVID-19 vaccines. Meanwhile, experts say helping the world is the only way to end the pandemic for Canadians too.
It's never over until it really is over elsewhere, which is what our Prime Minister also has said in public.
Many are now watching to see if Canada's actions match its words. Steve D'Souza, CBC News, Toronto.
Equity and fairness were topics at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles today, as the Prime Minister and U.S. President met face-to-face. The two leaders described the summit's key goals as defending democracy, battling inflation, and protecting the environment. Now, Trudeau also met with the governor of California, and on the environment, they did more than just talk. Evan Dyer's traveling with the Prime Minister.
It's only their second face-to-face meeting as leaders, but Biden says that's going to change soon with a visit in the coming months. We're going to be hanging out with each other a fair amount, Biden said. After Biden addressed the January 6th hearings and threats to democracy at home and abroad, the two leaders then focused on the economic hardships faced by many.
Even as we gather with our friends across the Americas, how we create prosperity, how we counter the rising costs of living.
Trudeau also met today with the governor of America's biggest state, Democrat Gavin Newsom of California, and the two signed a memorandum of cooperation that they say will see Canada and California work together and align standards on the environment, though they offered few details.
Between Canada and California on climate and nature, we're building a team of almost 80 million people. This new partnership will see us work together on everything from protecting nature, driving investment in clean tech, keeping single-use plastic out of our oceans.
Critics at home say the Trudeau government needs to focus less on making new commitments and more on meeting those it's already made.
We are miles away from meeting the targets for electric vehicles that Transport Canada has set out. We have missed every single climate target that we set, and we continue to give billions of dollars to big oil and gas.
Tomorrow, the governments gathered here are expected to announce a new pact on migration, though with Mexico boycotting the summit, making that into reality may prove tough. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Los Angeles.
A Michigan police officer has been charged with second-degree murder in the death of a driver.
It's been very difficult. The loss of a child causes unimaginable pain, stress, and the emotions they must be going through all of this.
26-year-old Patrick Loyola, who is black, was shot in the back of the head just minutes after this traffic stop in April. Loyola had been pulled over for driving a car with an unregistered plate. The officer, who is white, has turned himself in to police and is set to appear in court tomorrow. Well, to the war in Ukraine now. 2 British nationals and 1 Moroccan have been sentenced to death for their actions as fighters for Ukraine. The British men say they were members of the Ukrainian military and thus protected by the Geneva Conventions. But officials in Russian-controlled eastern Ukraine branded them mercenaries and terrorists. UK officials called the process a sham and are working to secure their release. Now, as more Ukrainians displaced by the war migrate here, some are bringing much-needed skills with them. And Canada's electricity sector, which has a shrinking workforce, is looking to seize an opportunity. Cameron McIntosh shows us how.
We have walked to the grocery store.
2 couples visiting like old friends, but they've only known each other about a week. Andriy Bashtovy and Maria Bakumenko fled Kyiv.
We're in Ukraine when the war began.
After 3 months of moving through Ukraine and Poland, they're now staying with Beth and Blair Evans in Bowmanville, Ontario.
So we posted that we were open to hosting a family, up to 2 people, and that is when Maria and Andriy reached out to us.
They're trying to start a new life here, including finding jobs. Turns out Blair works at Darlington Nuclear Plant.
I spoke to some people in human resources there and asked, is there anything we can do to help employ some of the highly skilled people?
And Andriy is an engineer.
I have recently had an interview, so I think I will be there.
Ukraine has a nuclear industry, and it's a highly specialized industry, and a lot of them were leaving for safety.
It may not be a one-off. Canada has a skilled labor shortage. The electricity industry says it's feeling it, as growing demand, a retiring workforce, and a transition to green energy create more demand for more jobs. Evident in recent events like the storm in Ottawa, which left people without power for over a week.
We're in the tightest labor market than we've been in since the 1970s.
Electricity Human Resources Canada represents 35 providers and utilities. It just opened a web portal aimed at recruiting newcomer Ukrainian talent.
There's such a wide array of opportunities to match Ukrainian people who have the will, the skills.
We know the Ukraine has a burgeoning and successful nuclear industry. We would like to take advantage of that.
Working on an advanced degree as an international student, Andriy was able to leave Ukraine. While he doesn't have a job yet, he's optimistic.
We're getting a lot of help with our new beginning.
Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Well, in Quebec, some employers are taking a different approach to deal with a shortage of workers.
Since I was little, I always wanted to get a job.
Next, the concern over the youngest employees in a province with no age limit. The Conservative leadership race drives party membership to a record high. At issue is here with why that could change the game. And later, one woman finds a hidden treasure inside a free couch she got off the internet.
Immediately, I can see that it was money.
We're back in 2.
CBC News, The National, named Canada's best national newscast at the Canadian Screen Awards.
Welcome back. The PGA Tour has suspended some of golf's biggest names for joining a breakaway tour. Live Golf is being bankrolled by the Saudi regime and offers $25 million in prize money for each tournament. Some big-name players like Phil Mickelson and Dustin Johnson have signed up to play. It's still unclear when, if ever, those players would be welcomed back to the PGA. Well, the growing labor shortage is hitting companies everywhere. But in Quebec, where there's no minimum age to work, employers are turning to very young people to fill their ranks. As Alison Northcott explains, there are now calls to better protect them on the job.
At this canteen, the youngest employee is just 11. The owner says not everyone is ready to work at that age, but says some are and are eager to. They have homework and final exams, says Pascal Lamarche, but they make it work and can get time off when they need it. With Quebec desperately short of workers, the province's labor minister says some employers are turning to younger people to fill their job needs. There's no minimum age to work in Quebec, but shifts can't interfere with school, and children under 14 need written permission from their parents.
Since I was little, I always wanted to get a job.
Leah Mercier is 15 and says she's worked every summer since 6th grade as a babysitter, a dog groomer, and in an art supply store.
Learning that confidence and learning how to set your boundaries with your bosses and coworkers is really good at a young age, because you're setting yourself up for success later on.
Statistics Canada doesn't break down labor data for workers under 15. BC recently raised its minimum working age from 12 to 16.
The actual economic context, the shortage in terms of workers.
This lawyer says with so many businesses eager to find workers, Quebec needs better protections for the youngest ones.
The younger they are, the more difficult it is to manage stressful situations such as productivity pressure or situation like sexism as well.
I'm extremely worried.
The labor minister says employers have legal responsibilities when it comes to young workers, but he's looking at improvements.
If we have to legislate to better, to make sure that the younger workers have a better supervision, I will do that.
There will also be training for employers to ensure young people are working reasonable hours in safe environments. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Well, we are hearing more now about a terrifying moment last weekend for an Alberta family. Their infant son was found safe after the family's truck was stolen with him inside. It happened Saturday night near Strathmore, Alberta, a town about 50 kilometers east of Calgary. The RCMP are thanking a group of strangers who chased after the suspect.
We were lucky we had a truck ourselves, because he was driving through ditches and going through like really steep parts and driving through farmers' fields. And we were able to keep up with him and not lose him.
Police eventually caught up with the suspect and arrested them. A 27-year-old man faces multiple charges, including abduction and dangerous driving. 2 fishermen are safe tonight, thanks to the crew of a passing ferry. The pair had been stranded on that life raft for more than a day after their boat sank. Their mayday call was heard by the ferry crew, who quickly sprang into action, bringing them safely to shore. Well, in parts of Canada, this spring has been a very difficult allergy season.
When I tap the branches, the pollen is just coming off.
We'll look at why it's so bad this year and how long it might stay that way. But first, Rosie's here with At Issue.
Hey, Andrew. Today, the Conservatives came out with record-breaking membership numbers. What does that tell us about the level of excitement for their leadership race? Is another debate needed? Chantal, Althea, Andrew, and Elamine are all here right after this.
My dad
Keep
loves you. He's
going.
got a big man crush on Ben Hebert.
Good parents.
That's what I like about boxing, is the fluidity and the being able to like do pretty things.
Back on the track, I'll be back in the beats. When it's guys in the back, you ain't got the means.
Yes, I think we'll be in the 600,000 range.
A lot of us still question that the numbers that Pierre Poilievre has claimed, but regardless, if he's confident in the memberships that he's sold up, why would he not want them to hear other perspectives?
That was Ian Brodie off the top, the chair of the Conservative Leadership Organizing Committee, and leadership hopeful Patrick Brown, both speaking to Power and Politics today. The party announced record-breaking membership numbers. What do they mean for the Conservatives? What does it mean for Pierre Poilievre, the perceived frontrunner? It's Thursday, and At Issue is here. Chantal Hébert, Elamine Abdul-Mahmoud, Althea Raj, and Andrew Coyne. Good to see all of you. Althea, I'm going to start with you on this. Obviously, over 600,000 members is a lot. What does that tell you about the level of enthusiasm, the state of the race, and I guess the claim by Pierre Poilievre that he's got half of those numbers?
Well, I mean, I don't have a way of independently verifying whether or not what the Pierre Poilievre camp is saying, but what they are saying is that they've sold over 311,000 paid membership, and that the party's base on which they started was about 140,000. So that is, like, really, frankly, an insane number. It is fantastic news for the Conservatives, the fact that more than 600,000 Canadians decided that they were so energized by this race, whether it was because they wanted to vote for Pierre Poilievre or they really wanted to help defeat Pierre Poilievre. Now, the real challenge is, can they get the people that they signed up to vote for them actually cast a ballot for them? But, you know, on the face of it, it looks like this is Pierre Poilievre's race to lose and that he could easily walk away with it on the first ballot.
It's interesting, Elamine, to see the way everyone's sort of framing the numbers, putting forward their own numbers, suggesting that other teams aren't telling the truth about their numbers. But we do know, regardless of where they are situated, as Althea says, we can't independently verify, it is a big gain for the party if they can turn those members into voters.
I think there is a lot of questions that sort of remain at this point. One is like, where are those votes located? Because that matters a lot in the Conservative leadership race.
That's right.
It really matters which ridings you have those people located in. You know, whether it's Erin O'Toole or Andrew Scheer, they both won the leadership by having quite a concentrated sort of new member sign up in a relatively small number of Quebec ridings, for example. And then the other thing is just the logistics, the sheer logistics of processing 600,000 new members. I mean, I don't know if the Conservative Party has the capacity to process that in time, because like that's a lot of like literally people putting information into computers, and I think like there will be a lot of questions about whether they can sort of keep up with that capacity. But on the face of it, as Althea said, like it's extraordinary news in terms of how engaged people are with this race.
What do you think, Andrew?
I'm not entirely sure it's such great news for the party. That number, when you look at where those memberships are coming from, that's a measure more of the intensity of the support than the breadth of the support. You know, so much of that is Poilievre's doing, and he is aiming his message at such a narrow slice of the electorate that, yeah, they're very excited. They want to come out to fight against vaccine mandates, et cetera, but I'm not sure that translates into breadth of support at election time. Also, it's a crazy way to choose a leader. The people who are going to decide this race, as in other races like this, are going to be people with no history of involvement or commitment to the party or interest or understanding of its ideas. It's just people who were recruited en masse in the fever of a campaign race, of a leadership race, who may or may not stick around for more than 5 minutes after the leader is chosen. No doubt, if you looked at it today, if the vote were held today, probably Poilievre would be the winner, although it's hard to tell. I mean, the numbers are pretty overwhelming, but even so, you know, when you have to win a proportionate share of 100 points in each riding, when it's a ranked ballot, there's some measure of uncertainty, and there's a lot of time between now and voting day, and he's got to sustain the enthusiasm of his followers so that they don't just sign up today, but show up a month or two from now to vote.
Yeah, Chantal?
I think Pierre Poilievre is in for the longest 3 months of his political life. It is one thing to sign up people. It's quite another to get them to vote. And look at last time, out of 270,000 some, 100,000 never showed up to vote. So he needs to keep them energized until September 10th. If that's the case, and to keep them energized. Not all of them signed up because they were anti-vaccines or others. He has entered the territory of diminishing returns. That is, whatever steps he takes to keep some on board, he stands to lose others. It's just because you sign up people, it doesn't mean they will vote for you. Final thought, it is the strategy of the Poilievre camp to look unbeatable so as to discourage either Patrick Brown or Jean Charest from going to the vote. And that would be a winning formula. At this point, it hasn't worked. But those numbers are put out there to make the others think that they should quit.
Yes, of course. And do we think he can continue? He can hold that momentum for 3 months, Althea? Because it is hard. And I would imagine some of the issues he's talking about, too, could dissipate, evaporate, or just disappear altogether.
Well, I mean, we've seen a challenge with that on the Bitcoin front. For example, when he started talking about Bitcoin was riding high. And when it started crashing, the message about everybody going out to buy Bitcoin really kind of sounded completely out of touch. So, yes, it is a challenge. I think another challenge, frankly, is not just, discouraging a third debate from the party or trying to continue that show of force, is that, frankly, he's been running on a message of freedom. And in order to vote for the Conservative leadership race, you have to prove your identity. So how many of those members are going to be comfortable photocopying their government ID, sending it over to Ottawa to get verified? I mean, I don't know that there's going to be that many people who really care passionately about that message, who are willing to give their private information to a political party.
Chantal, then Andrew, yeah.
When Stephen Harper fought Stockwell Day for the leadership, he leaked, quote unquote, that Stockwell Day might win. Why did he do that? To make sure that people who did not want Stockwell Day would come out to vote. The danger with Poilievre's strategy at this point is that he's basically sending the message, don't worry, don't send in all this information because I've got this in the back. And that could backfire.
Andrew?
Well, we've talked a lot about Poilievre. We should talk about a couple of the other candidates. If you looked at the body language and the statements they've been making, you have to say that Jean Charest is at best in third and maybe in fourth in memberships. That bodes ill for the strategy if it was that of him coming in ahead of Patrick Brown and Patrick Brown's supporters going to him. And it's not clear that if Charest's support went to Brown, he'd have any chance of overtaking Poilievre. So this has to be very disappointing for somebody who was a former federal cabinet minister, former premier of Quebec. You'd think would be very close to being a contender, and at this point doesn't look like it.
Elamine, and then I can see Chantal wants one little last word. Yes, Elamine, quickly.
I think it matters not just how many members you sign up, but also when, because I think, frankly, all Conservatives are looking at that Doug Ford victory here in Ontario, and they're thinking, maybe they're thinking differently about how they'd like to position a particular leader. I don't get the impression that Pierre Poilievre is going to become somehow more centrist and more retail politician the minute that he becomes a Conservative leader. I think actually he might intend to run on the very platform that he's advancing right now. I don't think he's going to switch that. And it's true that the attention on him in the next 3 months is going to be quite intense. It's even more true that it's going to look quite stark in comparison to Doug Ford and the ways that he sort of ran with a very managerial, very economically focused kind of message. I'm not really sure that the membership can stomach that, so we'll see what happens with that.
Chantal, you get 20 seconds.
Final word on Jean Charest. He's already won this campaign on a personal basis. He entered it with Quebecers looking at him as someone who was under investigation. Now people who don't even like him are cheering for him. And that's more than you can ask for if you're Jean Charest and you're his age and with his career.
Redemption is also a pretty good thing. Okay, we're going to take a very quick break, but when we're back, we'll have more at issue and a look into the inquiry into the government's use of the Emergencies Act, how the public safety minister is defending his government's actions after it seems that actually no police force specifically asked for the act to be invoked. That's next.
Why did the minister repeatedly fail to give Parliament accurate information, or was he just hoping he wouldn't get caught?
It was the responsible thing to do to invoke the Emergencies Act, and if you want to be a government, you got to know how to protect Canadians, Mr. Speaker. That's what we did.
Fire exchange and question period today. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendocino is still defending the government's use of the Emergencies Act, even as his deputy minister told a parliamentary committee that no one from law enforcement asked the feds to invoke it, and tried to explain what the minister meant. So how is the government defending the move? At Issue is back. Chantal, Elamine, Andrew, and Althea. Andrew, why don't you kick us off in terms of how you think the minister is explaining the use of this Emergencies Act?
Not at all well. The issue has shifted from the decision to invoke it to what the minister has been saying about it, because the minister's story has changed. Through the first few weeks and months of this, he was saying repeatedly and clearly that they made this decision on the advice of law enforcement. Never said who, but law enforcement on their advice. Then in this week, after several police, or a couple of police chiefs said, no, we never asked for that. They sent out his deputy minister to kind of change the story, to road test a new story, which is, well, actually what he meant was they asked for the powers. Well, those are contradictory statements, and they're not particularly plausible either one. But let's be clear, if the minister knowingly misled Parliament, that's a resigning offence. Ministers cannot lie to Parliament on a question of fact like this and expect to keep their job. So he's in more than a bit of hot water, and certainly has some explaining to do.
Okay, Althea, you spoke to the minister recently.
Yeah, we launched this podcast called It's Political, a little plug there. And I spoke to Marco Mendocino last week about this. I think initially when he said that they had acted on the advice of the nonpartisan law enforcement, he never said specifically that they asked for the act. He has consistently said that, no, I agree with you, Andrew. I think that in saying what he said, he's misleading people. He's giving people the wrong impression. But when you parse his words, and that's what we get paid to do, he's not specifically lied. He has left an impression that I think is incorrect in people's minds. Right. But you also would find it very troubling, I think, if law enforcement, the RCMP or the OPP said, we need the Emergencies Act, and basically dictated to the federal government what it should do. Yeah. Because clearly the act helped, but did it meet the threshold? That's the question MPs have to look at, and the commission, and we're not there yet. We don't know the answer to that question.
Except the government doesn't need the police to act in order to invoke the Emergencies Act. It's the government's decision to invoke it.
Yeah,
right. Chantal.
That's true.
True, but it must demonstrate with facts that no normal power of the police or whatever could have done the job. And if the minister is exaggerating, it's not just a style issue. It's a scrambling issue to put substance behind a decision. But this isn't just some capricious requirement. That is what the law says, that the government that uses it must be able to prove that it met the threshold. And if the threshold isn't met because the police didn't ask for it and you can't go for cover there, then show us other facts. Or else, Andrew is right, so far it's been more misleading than informative, and it is a legal requirement.
And I should clarify that in their attempts to smooth this over, the language that they use is that it was understood that the act was required. That is not sufficient at all, and that is not the conversation that was had with Canadians when this act was introduced. We were told, extraordinary circumstances, and the use of this act is the only way to get the situation under control. I think a lot of people were willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt in terms of going this additional step, even understanding that there are a lot of steps that the police had not been taking just yet. But I think on these revelations, going back to those words, those 3 words on the advice, those are heavy words. Those are substantial words that I think they have to substantiate. And the fact that they haven't yet is, frankly, a big problem for them.
10 seconds, Althea.
I just want to make it clear for people, that is not the threshold. Whether or not they acted on the advice of the cops, it doesn't matter. That is not the threshold of them having the ability to use this.
Okay. Clearly, this isn't going away. Clearly, you all like talking about it. So we will again. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Good to see you. Now I'll send things back to Andrew in Toronto.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. And when we come back, an explosion of pollen on the prairies.
The wind sort of rustled through the spruces, and I saw this tornado of yellow pollen, and instantly went inside and grabbed my mask.
We'll look at why it's been such a bad season and how long it could last.
I'm Jamie Poisson. Join me for CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner. Every weekday, Front Burner takes you deep into the story shaping Canada and the world. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, you might say it's been a rocky start for the $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope. NASA says it's been hit by a tiny meteoroid, leaving a small dimple, but it's not expecting to compromise the telescope's overall effectiveness. This was the fifth and largest hit to the telescope since its launch in December. In Spain, a wildfire has forced about 2,000 people from their homes. At least 3 firefighters have been injured since Wednesday trying to get it under control. It's expected to get worse over the weekend. About 1,000 firefighters, military and support personnel are involved. Well, just one of the signs of an intense allergy season hitting Canadians right now. That yellow stuff behind me is pollen, and there's a lot more of it than usual in the prairies. Bonnie Allen explains why.
As an allergy sufferer with asthma, Jacqueline Woods had to take matters into her own hands.
See that? The plumes of yellow pollen, and these are, again, pressure washed twice already.
She's washing the pollen out of her spruce trees so she and her family don't breathe it in, something that happened last weekend.
The wind sort of rustled through the spruces, and I saw this tornado of yellow pollen, and instantly went inside and grabbed my mask.
But her son couldn't escape it and required medical attention.
It had already progressed to a lung infection for him. So he finally went back to school today, antibiotics, inhalers. I think he's got 3 inhalers.
When I tap the branches, the pollen is just coming off.
This plant expert says the staggering amount of pollen we're seeing from coniferous trees like spruce, pine, and fir is the result of last summer's drought and extreme heat. Those conditions were stressful for trees and triggered a survival mechanism.
When a plant is threatened, when its survival is threatened, its reproduction system can sometimes go into overdrive.
Trees overproduced male cones that are now shedding pollen, and it's often highly allergenic. Francis Coates heads up a research lab that's tracking high pollen levels across Canada. Their measurements show the pollen started flying early this year and just kept coming.
Every year is different, but I'm comparing this year to last year, and the peaks are much, much higher this year.
You'll see even with the 2 nights of pressure washing and the rain we had through the night, there's still some live pollen in here.
This should all be over in a week or two, so Woods can enjoy going outside again. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan.
Okay, next, an online find that came with more than what was bargained for.
I put my hand, and behold, there was envelopes inside.
How a woman found the proverbial sofa stuffed with cash. In our moments. Well, this is Vicky Umodu. She had just moved into her new home and was looking for furniture on Craigslist when she found someone looking to give away a nice couch for free, which is a pretty great deal. But then she noticed something a little off about the cushion. What she found in it when she investigated, well, it shocked her, and it's our moment.
I picked the cushion up with my two hands. I felt something. What actually came to my mind was like heat pad. Then I said, oh, where is the cord to plug it? So finally I decided to zip it. I put my hand and behold, there was envelopes inside. Immediately I can see that it was money. I was calling my son to come. It didn't never cross my mind to keep the money. The first thing that came to my mind was just to call the guy. So finally when he came, I gave him the money. He was like holding his head like, like in disbelief. He was surprised, shocked, whatever he counted will be what we go with, 36,000. Oh no, why will I regret it? Never, never. For me, that was the right thing that I need to do, to return the money to the owner. And if I happen to be in that situation again, I will do the same thing because it doesn't belong to me.
Hear, hear. Now, apparently, it was as much of a surprise to the family that was giving away the chair as it was to Vicky that there was that much money in it. So there's a lot of mystery around, I think, this particular story. But the family that was giving away the chair did reward Vicky for her honesty, giving her a couple $1,000 as a reward, a thank you. That's The National for this June 9th. Have a great night.